and that trade as well, just because I want to talk about this trade with as many people as possible, because it's
Yeah, no, it is so fascinating. Like last Friday, like we're here recording on a Monday, I was out with some friends and
yeah,
I'm talking with my buddy who works in basketball, one of my great friends, and we were talking about a lot of different like personal stuff going on with us. We're really like deep in the weeds. And then he looks down and he sees the notification. He's like showing it to me, and I'm like,
yeah,
okay, as much as I want to keep talking about all of these things, what the hell? Like, what just happened?
yeah,
How did this happen? Like, my brain just completely flipped, and I've been thinking about it so much. Um, with this trade, it is very weird, first of all, to see a team like the Knicks, where I feel like for my entire life they've been the like, oh, they're rumored to be in talks for the guy, but we know it's the
yeah,
Knicks, so
yeah,
whatever, like it's not going to happen. They're kind of like always in the conversation, never getting the rose at the end. They're just in the running, and now they are getting the guys. Now that's one off season. Two of their long rumored speculated targets in Karl-Anthony Towns and Mikal Bridges are both there, which is just crazy to acknowledge in the first place. Um, they're clearly running an incredible operation, but
hmm
all of this comes down to having Jalen turn into the guy he is.
yeah,
And I think when you talk about the outlier development stories in the recent NBA, everyone brings up Steph Curry. Obviously, it's like, hey, this little guy with the flimsy ankles has suddenly broken offensive basketball because of the way he can shoot, and he's completely redefined success from a lead guard and how he does it. You look at Kawhi Leonard,
yeah,
where it's like this guy is, when he's playing and when he's healthy and at his peak, one of the most dominant two-way forces we've ever seen. Like a guy who can lead your offense, score at every level, and shut down your best option. It's preposterous. And Jalen Brunson, I think, belongs in those conversations
hmm
because he is a smaller guard. He's a guy who, by every stretch of the imagination, should not be as good around the rim as he is. He should not be as good at creating contact and getting to the line consistently. I mean, it's just NBA Twitter fan brain, but everyone like calls him. They're like, oh, he's a grifter and all this and whatever. It's like he's way too small to be a grifter. Like guys traditionally do not get those calls
yeah,
because it takes some serious craft to be his size, get into the rim, and create enough contact and sell it in a way that the refs are going to reward you time and time again.
hmm
Just from a pure optics standpoint, like if you're a smaller guy and you run into the paint and suddenly you're getting clobbered, a lot of times refs are just like, yeah, well, what do you expect? Like,
yeah.
what do you think was going to happen, dude?
Get out of there.
Yeah, get out of there. Like, go be in the mid range and go shoot threes and other stuff. But his true outlier pressure around the rim, like the easy points he generates, even when his outside shot isn't falling, is crazy. And on top of that, he's an incredible mid-range scorer and he's a great three-point shooter on and off the ball. So I love watching Jalen as a player. But now we look at this and we saw the heights the Knicks could reach last year. They had, like, obviously the OG Anunoby trade was huge. That injected a whole different element to them.
hmm
But now we're seeing, kind of going back to like, if the Wizards and the Jazz were looking at an ideal outcome for how these rebuilds could go, they'd say, okay, we have our small guard, he's our initiator, and then we have a Josh Hart, an OG Anunoby, and Mikal Bridges, like three long, athletic, extremely good defenders who can do different things offensively. We've seen Josh Hart, like he hits some big shots, but he's a great cutter. He can get involved on the offensive rebounding game. Mikal Bridges, before this cat trade, I was perfectly comfortable with the idea of him being the second option.
Yeah.
He was definitely miscast in Brooklyn as being the lead guy, but there were a lot of times in Phoenix where, before Kevin Durant's arrival, it was like, okay, Chris Paul is not what he used to be as an on-ball creator. Obviously, Devin Booker is like your A1 guy all of the time,
Mhm.
but here's McHale stepping up because he can be this great off-ball shooter. He can manipulate things in the pick and roll. He can drive. And now you throw Cat into this equation, and this team is just fascinating. You went from like Hardenstein was a great player in his own right, but Karl-Anthony Towns is perhaps like the best shooting big man we've ever seen in this league. And on top of that, he's a really good screener. He can drive, put the ball on the deck. He's a very athletic finisher. I think, all of the shooting stuff like sort of underrates the fact that he can like take two dribbles and dunk on your head.
Yeah.
Um, so it really opens up so many interesting options because with Karl-Anthony Towns, like if you are handling and he's coming to screen for you, he's an equal threat to roll as he is to pop. You can kick it to him, pop, they close out. Now he's driving and he's creating offense that way. But I'm really interested to see how they handle the dribble handoff game in New York because Tibbs, he's generally like a pretty pick and roll heavy guy, but he's incorporated some more of those dribble handoff elements, and
Yep.
Hartenstein was extremely good at those. And now it's like, hey, the guy running those dribble handoffs is not just like a decent scorer, he's one of the better big man scorers in the league, and he can kill
Mhm.
you from anywhere on the court. So I'm fascinated to see how that works out. And especially with the pieces they have around them, like if you are trying to figure out the help points from a uh, Karl-Anthony Towns, Jalen Brunson screening action. Like let's just say they have the lineup that I've been thinking about on the floor, which is those two are running the screens, and then you have Josh Hart, OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges all over the floor. If you help off Josh Hart, he's just going to cut into the space you create, and he's going to finish, or he's going to be a demon on the offensive glass if they don't find him as a passing option. OG Anunoby, he's really strong. He can drive a closeout, but we've also seen him be a really good shooter. So now
Yeah.
you're helping off a great shooter. And you definitely do not want to be helping off Mikal Bridges because not only is he a knockdown guy, but if you help off of him for these Jalen Cat actions, now he gets to be the second side guy. He's
Mm.
making these decisions. He's driving. He's shooting. He's kicking it back out for others. So I think this is one of like the more interesting home run swings of a trade that we've seen in a while because Randall presented some interesting options, but the things he's really good at are driving, posting up, shooting in the mid range. Like he can do some things on the outside and as a roller screener guy,
Yeah.
but he's not nearly as versatile as Cat. And you're not as comfortable with him being like a small ball five, even with the kind of defenders you have around him. And now you're looking at this from a defensive standpoint. If Jalen Brunson is your weak point, and you have Mikal Bridges, OG, Josh Hart, and Cat protecting the rim among those five, that is tough. Even if the goal is just let's go at Jalen over and over again,
Mhm.
well, you've got three like all world wing defenders helping off of that. And then Cat, who is thoroughly underrated as a rim protecting presence. I'm just like I think this is easily the team I'm most interested in watching for this upcoming season because they really have the potential for we all saw what Boston did last year. Boston has put together an unbelievable team. They have so many options.
Yep.
And now you have a team that can sort of rival them with that optionality where it's, yeah, okay, most nights you're going to be running through Jalen Brunson. Maybe some nights the offense is going through Cat. Maybe some nights Mikal Bridges is the one stepping up and doing all of this creation. And oh yeah, we also get to sprinkle in Mitchell Robinson when he's healthy. We get to sprinkle in Deuce McBride. There's just so many fun pieces that they can play with and different ways that they can beat you. My question for you on this Knicks team is,
Yeah.
like, what excites you more? Is the offense potential here and the different ways they can beat you, or the defense, like all the different lineups they can throw at you?
So I'm definitely going to lean offense there, and I think it allows me to talk about Mikal Bridges a little bit more as a guy who I think
Mm-hmm.
in Brooklyn, if you were to forget about sort of the all NBA level wing defense that he brings you, and just think about Mikal Bridges, the offensive player in Brooklyn, he really profiled quite similarly to some of the guys that we've spoken about today, where, likes to access the mid-range game, likes to take a few dribbles, maybe not the best playmaker in the world. I definitely think he was probably a better connective passer in Phoenix than he was a primary initiator in Brooklyn. And now you give him Karl-Anthony Towns instead of a Nick Claxton or, a Ben Simmons at points they ran very early on in the season, or a Day'Ron Sharpe. And I think that he could see an ease on his sort of creative burden in the same way that Jaylen Brown did last year, operating with Kristaps Porzingis in the pick and roll, where Jaylen Brown had always been a really flawed playmaker and, was sort of prone to turnovers and having that left hand picked on. But suddenly you give someone a 7-foot guy that can space to 30 feet, and that stuff doesn't look nearly as bad anymore because they've got a
Mm-hmm.
far more open sort of middle of the court to operate in. So I think that Mikal could be due to have a massive offensive impact. And I was maybe a little bit worried about that if he had to share the court with Mitchell Robinson all the time, because he's not a guy that's necessarily the most athletic of finishers when he has the ball in his hands. And now I think that path is going to be all the way open. Jalen Brunson, and one of the reasons why he's escaped this label of just like pure bucket getter is because he's developed into one of the better 3-point shooters in the league, developed into an elite pull-up threat. I just looked it up, 44.5% on catch and shoot threes last year. So you spoke about this idea of having no idea what Jalen Brunson's going to do when he interacts with Karl-Anthony Towns in screening settings. But once again, Towns can have the ball, and Brunson is a real threat to just sort of like navigate around him without ever having to take a dribble and then pop up for one of the higher percentage shots in the NBA. So that's something that I'm really excited about. I'd be remiss not to mention one of the groups of people that I reached out to when I read about this trade the Saturday morning, because I'd literally gone to bed half an hour before it happened, UK time, which is a nightmare. I love that sort of adrenaline rush of it's 12:30, 1 a.m. going, oh my God, what's happened? But I reached out to the guys at the Hot Hand Theory, XJ
Mm.
and Jeff. They work for the Strickland and Knicks Film School. And I said, I bet you guys want Deuce McBride to start over Josh Hart. And they said, yeah, you've read our mind. That is absolutely what we're looking to do. They have the opportunity to put, I think, like you alluded to, Charlie, to have no spacing weaknesses whatsoever. Yeah, I love Josh Hart as a player, but his 3-point shot can run hot and cold unless he's playing against Philadelphia in a playoff series.
Yep. Yeah.
They can really have 4 nigh on 40% 3-point shooters around Jalen Brunson next year with Karl-Anthony Towns in the team. And then Deuce McBride could be their primary point of attack defender, where if you're coming up against a team that likes to employ movement, that likes to run you around a ton of screens, Deuce can do that all day. He's small and sort of shifty and burly enough that he's able to get around those. So I think that they've got real optionality there. And I like the fact that Tibbs has worked with Karl-Anthony Towns before. I think that obviously Tibbs will have signed off on this trade, and a lot of people's concerns will be, well, you had to go and get Rudy Gobert in Minnesota. They didn't trust him to play the 5. I think that Tibbs
Mm-hmm.
knows full well that their best lineup isn't going to be a sort of double big pairing of Cat and Mitchell Robinson. So I think he's definitely got some ideas as to what Towns can do with all of this protection of an OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges, potentially Josh Hart in the starting lineup as well. So I think that they're a really mean proposition. They're a little bit thin at the moment, and I'm worried that some of their guys are Iron Men. Like Jalen Brunson never seems to go down. Mikal Bridges has literally never missed a game. I think he played like 84 games in the season he got traded from Phoenix to Brooklyn.
Yeah.
But Towns has had his injury worries, and OG obviously misses a little bit of time each season as well. So as long as they can ride those out and sort of get this group healthy into the playoffs, I think that they could have a titanic matchup against Boston. But they're not infallible. I'd love to see them play the Pacers, for example. I think that's really interesting with Cat at the 5 and then Turner equally stretching him out at the 5 as well. I think the fact that Cleveland have double bigs to throw, Milwaukee have all this rim pressure with Giannis against Cat. It's like they've got one of the highest overall teams that you could have on 2K, where it's no one's below an 85 in that starting lineup. But I still see a couple of weaknesses where this is going to make for really, really great series come playoff time.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And, I think the Minnesota conversation made things so interesting when they acquired Gobert, because so much of that team, Mike Conley is still really good as a defender, but he's not like the kind of like near shutdown guy, like real two-way star that he used to be.
Yeah.
Anthony Edwards, when he locks in defensively, is unbelievable, but that's not a given on a play-to-play basis. I mean, Jaden McDaniels is incredible in his own right, but I think what they realized in building that team was Rudy Gobert, just as a presence, it hardly matters what you have around him. His presence on the floor makes you like a top 10 defensive unit, because his entire energy is committed to moving around, denying these rim looks. His length is just ridiculous. And Karl-Anthony Towns is not the kind of guy who can do that. I mean, few are, but if you switch them out in those situations where it's like, okay, we have like 2 to 3 good defenders around you, depending on how Ant is playing at any given time, it's not going to be like everyone's getting by, everyone's getting to the rim. You got to stop everything, but he has a lot of responsibility down there.
Yeah.
And now I think what's so important is with McBride, with Hart, with Anunoby, with Mikal Bridges, they're going to take away so much that what Cat has to clean up as a rim protector is going to be few and far between. I mean, this is easily the best defensive group that's ever been placed around him in his career, and allowed him to play as that true center. So that, I think, should be really interesting. I do think they will try to mix in the double bigs at some points.
Definitely. Yeah.
But, that's the other thing too, is Cat had to go from being the anchor as the 5 to, okay, now I get to play off Rudy. Now I'm a rotational guy. I'm trying to help from the weak side, or, come over and help like more focused on the rebounding aspect of things. And I think he gets to oscillate between those two now at a really healthy rate, where, if he's the guy sitting there anchoring, odds are they have at least 3 excellent defenders out there on the perimeter containing things. And if they run double big and he's the help guy, guess what? You're probably still going to have some really good perimeter defenders, and Mitchell Robinson is behind you. So much of what they have done, I think, takes away from the workload that he needs to do and allows him to really excel both offensively and defensively without having to just fly around and do it all. He can pick his spots for when he wants to take over offensively, and he can, I think, play from like a position of strength on defense where things are being contained in front of him. He has a longer time to read and react to what he wants to do, and it'll be a lot easier to pick like, okay, I'm back in drop because Deuce McBride or because Josh or whoever is containing this ball handler. I see they're trying to get to the rim. Do I want to go commit to that and be help, or do I want to seal off my man and focus on the rebound because I trust them to force them into a bad shot? And that is just going to be so much fun. I am just dying for a future. Like, I'm just on my knees praying for a Knicks Celtics playoff series. Obviously, you want all the marbles on the table for conference finals, but like, please let me see those two teams play each other in a playoff setting, because there's nothing more exciting to me than when there's teams on both ends of the floor where they have the personnel to do different things. They
Hmm.
can play that chess game of, okay, this is how they're going to try to play it. Well, we're going to make these substitutions, or we're going to make these coverage changes, or we're going to dial up or dial down our level of aggression. And that just has so much fun potential because, I think this Eastern Conference, Boston, they ran through last year. Like, no surprise, they were a dominant team. But the league just feels so much more fun when you feel
Yeah.
like both conferences, like, there are some teams where you could, like, play the hypotheticals and be like, hey, if they get this matchup at this time, everyone's healthy, they could really create some problems. And,
Hmm.
we're headed down this now where it feels like, okay, Milwaukee, they have a lot of injury questions, continuity problems. Maybe some of their guys just are kind of over the hill of what that championship team used to be. I mean, Miami, when you have Bam Adebayo, Jimmy Butler, Eric Spoelstra, it's always like, I don't know. Like, I don't want to count them out. But it really felt like before this trade, okay, the Knicks are exciting, but are they truly enough to stop Boston from just stampeding through the Eastern Conference for a second straight year? And now it feels like, okay, like, hey, unless someone manages to eliminate one of them early in like a major upset in the
Yeah.
playoffs, or there's some huge injuries, they're going to have to fight through one another at some point. And I think the Knicks, for my money, I think they present the most interesting challenge in the league to Boston. And I think I'd be willing to go so far as to say they are like, Boston is in the tier of their own as a contender, where it's like, look, if everything goes to plan, you should win another championship.
Hmm.
In that pack behind them, where you could have, Dallas, Oklahoma City, a lot of those like Western Conference teams. I think the Knicks are at the head of the pack for me. I feel like this is headed for that kind of season where we see both of them win 60 plus games and they come together in the conference finals. And it just has that feeling of like, man, whoever wins this, like, I think they're going to be holding the Larry when it's
Yeah.
all said and done in June. So,
And then they've got OKC to play in the finals, which will just be mental in itself. It's kind of like
yeah,
Rocky going 15 rounds with Apollo Creed, and then suddenly he's got to get in the ring with Ivan Drago
yeah,
at the
yeah,
end of it.
exactly.
Um, yeah, I think the thing that excites me the most about that matchup is the fact that I think this would be the first time that we saw two ultra high level 5 out teams face each other in like a conference finals or final setting. I've just gone back through the past like 10 years of the East and the West, and I don't see anything where like maybe you could say the Warriors and the Mavericks in 2022, but that Mavericks team wasn't nearly on the same level as the teams that we're
Mhm.
talking about here, even if Maxi Kleber was working wonders back then. So that feels like another sort of like great step for our game, which should be really, really interesting to witness. Um Last point, I think that I'm fascinated to see whether Towns is utilized in more of a Porzingis way, where a lot of his offensive value is through like what he brings off the ball, or do they lean into a little bit more of Cat the hub, or some sort of approximation of Jokic Murray 2-man game between Brunson and Cat? Because you said this was the best defensive cast that Cat has ever had around him as a five. This is easily the best spaced floor Cat has ever had too. So there might be some thinking in that New York organization where they say, hey, why don't we give the 7 foot guy all the space in the world? And why don't we let him put up 20, 25 shots per game? And then suddenly you're looking at two like 27 point per game scorers on the Knicks, and Karl-Anthony Towns is in second team All NBA discussions just behind Embiid and Jokic. So that's my final sort of fun thing to consider. But Charlie, unless you've got anything else on that Titanic trade or this topic for today,
Yeah,
I think it's a podcast, dude.
The one thing I wanted to point out too was when you talk about that Porzingis type role.
Yeah.
I got to give a shout out to Todd Whitehead, one of my favorite data viz guys in all of basketball. He does some incredibly insightful stuff on the way the game is changing.
Yeah.
And he charted the average distance from the basket that teams' rim defenders were last year. And the Boston Celtics last year were far and away number one.
Right.
In the average screening action, the defender was 11 feet and 4 inches away from the rim. The only three teams that were able to clear 10 feet were the Pacers, the Thunder, and the Bucks. Wow. Do you want to guess who was dead last in the entire league?
Oh, Minnesota?
Nope, it was the Knicks.
Oh, wow, of course, because of Mitch Robb. Yeah, he's only shoots from a foot away, right?
Yep, they were dead last with Mitch Robinson. And, when you have guys like Jalen Brunson running around, if Isaiah Hartenstein beats you, so be it.
Yeah.
And I would not be surprised if they go from dead last to one of the upper echelon teams in that category because of what Cat brings.
Charlie, I looked this up the other day for a different podcast. I think it was the Atlantic Division preview. Would you like to hazard a guess at the percentage that the Boston Celtics shot in the restricted area during the playoffs?
Oh, it must have been like at the very least high 60s, if not low 70s. I'll say like 71% is my guess.
They shot 74% from the restricted area in the playoffs. So if you guys just listen to that stat from Charlie and thought, that's not too important. Who cares where the screen's being engaged with? It matters big time. And that could mean stuff for Jalen Brunson because he's been able to like really up his volume over the past couple of years, but his efficiency has suffered in the playoffs. If we now see efficient Jalen Brunson, he was really, really efficient back at the start of his career and certainly when he was emerging in Dallas. If we're seeing him get towards that sort of like 60% true shooting mark again in the playoffs, this team has such a high ceiling. So yeah, it's really exciting. You bring a great point up of he's not going to be running into Mitchell Robinson's help defender every time down the floor anymore.
Nope. Yeah, it's a whole different ball game for them now.
Yeah, guys, I think that's a podcast. I have just sat here sort of giddy for an hour and 40 minutes, as Charlie has too. If you've watched this, neither of us have stopped smiling, especially since that cat trade has come up. We like two guys on the playground going, "Did you see what happened? Did you see Sports Center last night?" So I've had a blast. I hope that you guys have had a blast listening at home, and I hope that you've enjoyed listening to Charlie because I've really enjoyed chatting to him. Make sure to follow him down below on Twitter. Make sure to keep an eye out for some of the work that we'll be publishing and producing for Swish Theory this year because he really is one of the best out there. And feel very lucky to have spoken to him today. And Charlie, long may this giddiness continue, my friend. I hope you look forward to the 24-25 season.
Absolutely. The day that I am not smiling and giggling when talking about just NBA trades and all the potential they create and all the lineups, like that'd be a sad day when I'm not just like ear to ear smiling, just thinking about potential lineups and actions. And that's what I love about this game. And thank you for bringing me on to get to just, as you said, do a little bit of rambling. And it's just the best, man. I appreciate it.
Anytime, Charlie. You drop me a message and I'll have you on tomorrow, mate. That was a blast. Yeah, guys, that is another episode of the Drop Step. Like I said, go and check out Charlie's stuff. Keep an eye on the YouTube channel, on the Spotify feed, on the Apple feed, wherever you get the podcast, because we've got plenty of exciting content planned. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's episode because it was great. There was something a little bit different as well. Bucket getters have got to change, but I think we've established the ways that they have to. And I think that we've established how exciting that Knicks trade is because, my God, the potential seems endless. So Yes, thank you for listening, and make sure to tune back in next week.
Peace.